Moondrop earphones are the hottest thing at the moment, and the Starfield are probably the most hyped of them all. I mean, just look at them, they're absolutely stunning. But my question is, are they any good? Well, let's get into it. Hey guys, this is Noel and this is Wheezy Reviews. Each week I take a look at something audio related and let you know what I think, so if you're into that kind of thing, then make sure you subscribe. So Moondrop seems to be setting themselves up as more of a fashion brand or a lifestyle brand rather than your generic chi-fi earphone brand. And I think that aesthetics or looks, whatever, are obviously a key focus of Moondrop, featuring anime drawings and designs, and the Starfield being a very, very pretty design. They even do at least one model that allows you to have an anime drawing engraved on the side. Now, the Starfield is one of the brand's more wallet-friendly offerings, and they come in around about $100 or about £90 in the UK. Now, despite this rather reasonable price point, they're easily one of the best-looking earphones that I've ever seen. So let's just go over the specs briefly then. They feature a 10mm dual-cavity carbon nanotube dynamic driver. They have an impedance of 32 ohms and a really high sensitivity of 122 dB. So the build is an all-metal construction with a metallic blue or purpley pearlescent paint job with a gold star-like design on the left ear and the Starfield name on the right ear. The actual shape of them themselves are kind of your generic earphone shape, which is not really a complaint, but my only real complaint is actually with the weight of these, which is rather heavy at 10 grams per earpiece without tips. That's a pretty chunky boy right there. Now, I do actually find that extra weight does cause them to slip out of my ears a little bit more than another earphone with a lower weight would do. I found myself often having to readjust them in my ears and push them in, and over time they would slip out, particularly when I was walking around. Of course, this is going to be entirely personal, as fit always is, but I did have to spend quite a bit of time experimenting with different tips to get the right fit for me. And that may or may not be the case for you, but I just thought I would mention it. Overall, I do find that the fit with the TRN T4 was much better for my ears. I was able to get a much deeper and more secure seal with the tips in my ears than I was with the Starfield. Again, that's going to be an entirely personal experience, but this was just my experience. Now, regarding the tips, the Starfield does actually come with 6 different pairs of tips. You're getting 2 pairs each of each size of small, medium, and large. They're not particularly special, these tips. They're rather generic chi-fi tips. Really, if you're looking for a replacement anywhere, there's nothing special about these. The cable is pretty nice, actually. Many stock cables are either terrible or just okay. And the one with the Starfield is this 4-core cable in this blue colorway that matches the IEM itself. The color looks quite nice together. I'd say that this cable is above average in quality. I'll just unroll it. This Velcro strap thing is something I put on there myself just to keep it tidy. Though you don't get that with it. The connector here is your standard 0.78mm 2-pin. This one's actually really nice and flexible, and in terms of a stock cable, this one's really, really nice. In fact, I would say it's better than the stock cable that you get with the TRN T2 and the TRN T4. Both of those, actually, the one with the TRN T4 is not too bad. But if you are in the market for an upgrade cable, because this one, something that this one doesn't have, which I do prefer to see, is a chin cinch for comfort reasons. I don't like the cable like dangling around in front of me too much. I find it causes the earphone to become a little bit unstable in the ear, and I prefer to stop the cable from moving too much with the chin cinch. And actually, the cable that I've been using for the most part with these earphones is the TRN T2. This is the T2, which is a 16-core cable, and it's only like £8, which is like a bargain, really. I'll put a link in the description for that. So the TRN T2 is the 16-core. They do a T4, I think it is, which is an 8-core, which is also pretty nice. I've got one of those as well. A really, really good cable. I highly recommend it. Included with the Starfield, you have this really, really nice little carrying pouch. Probably one of the nicer ones that I've seen. I've seen a lot of these weird round ones with a zip around it. Usually they're a bit cheap feeling, they're a bit bulky, but This one's really nice. It's got this nice soft lining to it. It's really stiff. And the only complaint I have about this is that it's a bit small. I mean, if we just look at this cable, put that in there, it's quite a tight fit. But that does make it really nice and compact. Moondrop do a much nicer, I think it's going to be a personal preference whether it's nicer, but it's a bit more roomy. This one, I think it's the one that they supply with the KXXS, is that right? But this one's a little bit bigger. This is quite nice as well. Also included are 6 replacement filters for the nozzle and a pair of tweezers to help you fit them. So before I finish up with the build and spec, I want to talk about this really, really beautiful paint job. I think it's absolutely stunning, but unfortunately, because of the way that these are painted, I'm not sure if it's like enameled or whatever, but it's a metal body that's been painted and glossed with this fancy paint job, and it is quite susceptible to chipping. Now, I've absolutely looked after mine as much as I possibly could, and one of these does have a chip. There we go. I'm not sure if I can get the camera to show this up, but right in this corner, right in front of my thumb there. Oh, let's get this here. Just in front of my thumb on that corner there, if it comes out on camera. I think it does. I'll try and get a shot of that in B-roll if not. That has a chip, which I have no idea how it got it. Something you are going to have to watch out for is when you take them off and they're dangling on the cable, that they don't bash into each other and end up chipping the paint. I've absolutely babied these just to make sure I don't chip them, and I feel I couldn't possibly use these as a daily driver. They're probably going to get chipped, and they're going to start looking a bit well worn at that point. So perhaps these aren't a daily driver earphone, maybe more of an occasional earphone. In many ways, I suppose that's quite fitting for the Starfield, because the entire experience of owning the Starfield, the looks, the build, the sound, it's kind of a special occasion in many ways. Picking the Starfield for listening, I find, was actually almost an event in itself. I'd take them out of their case, the really, really nice case, and the nice cable and how they look really nice, and then put them in. It's almost like an event in its own right. It adds a certain tactile experience to listening to earphones that I find quite enjoyable, actually. But of course, all of that would be for naught if they didn't sound any good. So let's talk about how they sound. Now, before I get too deep into the sound section, I'm going to go through a few of my usual disclaimers. And that's that all listening was done using lossless sources. That's either from my PC through a dedicated headphone amp, or through my phone, from my phone via the FIO BTR3 for the simulation of mobile listening. Not that I've been going out thanks to this whole crisis thing that's going on at the moment. I did all of my testing with silicon tips, specifically these small... well, actually, I went through a lot of different tips throughout my testing, and that's why I'll talk about that a bit more later. But the tips I settled on are the small stock ones, and I did most of my listening with those. I'm also going to be making some comparisons and references to the TRN T2, which is my current Hi-Fi benchmark, and at this price point, also probably the main competition for the Starfield. I also did all my listening on the Starfields with silicon tips as well. Specifically SpinFit tips at the moment I'm using on those. They seem to work well for me on the T4. Also, I want to say, please keep in mind that I cannot speak for unit variants. I have one pair of Starfield here, and I've obviously done all of my testing with this one pair. So if there is a significant unit variance with these, I couldn't tell you. And finally, a note to the fanboys and the haters. I'm quite nitpicky, so I'm going to be saying both positive and negative things, but that doesn't mean that I'm either hyping or hating, and I do always, with all of my reviews, try and keep a balanced approach, so just keep that in mind. Take the entire review as a whole, not just small sections where you disagree with me. Okay, so I'm going to start out with staging and imaging. And I think that the Starfield has a respectable sense of staging for an IEM. I think it's probably a little bit wider or more open than the TRN T2, with imaging being pretty good as well. Onto bass, and perhaps I think that bass is the weakest point of the Starfield, unfortunately. There is a decent amount of bass volume, a decent amount of extension, and there's a good fullness that's not bloated. The problem is that it isn't especially quick or all that articulate, and compared to the T4, it somewhat lacks punch, detail, and energy, but comes across as rather relaxed and laid back. The bass is deep and full when it needs to be. It's quick and punchy enough when it needs to be, but I don't think it particularly excels in this area. Now, according to Clinical's measurements, I had a look at his graphs, and the Starfield has an overall stronger bass performance than the T4, according to the graphs. And that elevation does reach out into the mid-range. And on the whole, my ears didn't quite agree with that. As I said, I did find the bass to be quicker, fuller, and more impactful on the T4. So it is possible that that extra technical ability gave the impression of a greater elevation on the T4 than the Starfield. I would say that the in terms of actual raw power and elevation on the Starfield, it is no slouch. But because the T4 gave a much more lively and energetic and more articulate performance, I actually felt that the low end and the bass on the T4 was much, much better. Now, if it sounds like I'm hating on the Starfield at this point or being a little bit harsh, that's only because I'm being quite nitpicky, as that's what I do. I do feel like the bass performance is more than acceptable with the Starfield. It comes across as not too elevated, not too light, with a decent technical performance. It's just not the most technical bass that I've ever heard from an IEM. Did that get in the way of my enjoyment of them? Not really. And whilst in tracks like Polaris by Deadmau5, the Starfield didn't quite have the same punchiness as the T4, it did very well, and I did enjoy them thoroughly. So let's move on to the mid-range then, and it's a fair improvement on the bass. The low end is a little bit warmer, perhaps a little bit more coloured versus the T4. Where the big difference comes across, though, is in the upper mids. And actually, the upper mids are probably the strong point with the Starfield, in that it's not shouty at all. Many, if not most of the IEMs that I've tried, they tend to be quite shouty and even peaky in the upper mids, with the only exception really being the Blonde BL3, which is quite the opposite and a little bit, well, relaxed in the upper mids. More so than the Starfield. At least the particular unit of Blonde BL3 that I tried. I mean, unit variance is a considerable thing with those, so, you know. The Moondrop Starfield is, yeah, not as relaxed as the Blonde BL3, but it comes across as really nicely relaxed with enough energy to shine. It's actually quite a welcome change from the T4, which has considerable glare around about 5 kHz. You could probably say that the Starfield has reached a sort of a Goldilocks tuning in terms of a casual listening earphone, the presentation of which is extremely smooth. It's inoffensive without any of that peakiness seen on other IEMs. Frankly, this is an earphone that I could listen to for hours upon hours at a time and not get any listening fatigue. There's also an excellent amount of detail on offer with the Starfield in the mids, particularly those upper mids. Definitely up there as one of the better IEMs that I've tried. Saying that, I do think that the T4 edges it in terms of detail. The upper mids and treble do have a certain sparkle and energy that makes electric guitars shine, for example. On Sultans of Swing, for example, whilst both the Starfield and the T4 were really giving me life, the Starfield was much more smooth, with the T4 being a fair bit more lively. So on the whole, the mid-range of the Starfield seems to be a little bit more coloured than the T4. I'd say, ignoring that 5 kHz shout, the T4 is overall probably more natural than the Starfield. But thanks to that 5 kHz glare that somewhat spoils that upper mids of the T4, the Starfield out of the box is going to be a much safer and more enjoyable pick for most people. Similar could be said for the treble, which again is nicely smooth and restrained without harshness or peakiness or graininess. It has a good sense of air as long as you don't use foam tips. I said I would talk about this a little bit more, but it actually took me a little while to write this review, because I went backwards and forwards between loving the Starfield and then being rather unimpressed with them. And I believe that most of that was driven by how well I could get a seal with the Starfield. I tried just about every tip I own with these to try and find a good seal with a comfortable and secure fit. And at one point, I even ended up getting an ear infection from constantly taking them in and out and then trying the T4s and swapping between earphones. It's been a bit of a struggle to get this review finished. And I actually ended up settling on the smallest size of the stock tips after going around different tips for a long time. And I ended up going back to those, and those ones were the ones that fit me the best. Normally, when I'm struggling for fit with tips, I'm going to just go with foamies because I tend to always be able to get a good seal, at the very least, with foam tips. So I tried a pair of small-sized Moondrop Mist Tip foam tips. They're really, really nice tips, actually. They're pretty expensive, but they fit me absolutely perfectly. No problems in terms of the fit with those. But they did kill the upper frequency detail and the air quite considerably, actually. Really, they just kind of ruined the Starfield for me. I'd actually started out using foam tips with them because I tend to always prefer foam tips, and initially I thought that the Starfield sounded okay, but I wasn't blown away by them. And then when I put the silicons on, there was a considerable difference between the foams and the silicons, and I really think that these are a no-go in terms of foam tips. Now, all IEMs are affected by tip type, insertion depth, and seal, some more so than others, and I do, on a personal level, struggle with silicon tips, and getting a good seal with the Starfield was more difficult for me than other IEMs that I've tried. For example, with the T4, actually, I can get a pretty good seal with the T4 and have them stay in place securely and comfortably, and I think part of that is due to the shape of the T4 because they're sort of barrel shaped, which I think I actually prefer the shape of the T4 much more, basically because of that. So I'd say that perhaps the reason why I was struggling is a combination of the nozzle diameter, the nozzle length, the body shape, the weight of the body of the IEM is quite a heavy one, like I said, at 10 grams, as well as the tip type and size. I think the lesson to take away from this is that sometimes you really do need to tip roll with an IEM to find the most optimal tip and fit with your ears. So I would say try every tip in the box, try some others you have in the house. Sometimes it takes work to get a good fit and seal, and it can change the sound quite drastically. So if you're not getting on with a particular IEM, try a few different tips. That's my tip about the tips. An IEM tip. IEM tip. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to the sound summary then. Overall tonality, I think, is one of a rather refined and relaxed tuning, albeit a rather safe and inoffensive tuning. I go back and forth between the Starfield and the T4, and I wasn't really sure which one I preferred. Having said that, I think instead of competing with each other, they rather complement each other. In terms of technicalities, then, the Starfield is no slouch, definitely being up there as one of the better ones that I've heard. But I think the T4 edges it. And when I say technicalities, I'm speaking in terms of speed, energy, and excitement, and to a lesser extent, imaging, instrument separation, and overall detail. It's not that the Starfield suffers here at all. I'm not saying it's bad. But on a more technical level, I'm saying that the T4 is a stronger contender, as far as I'm concerned. The flip side of this coin is that the Starfield has a much safer, more enjoyable tuning out of the box. The T4 can be quite harsh, that 5 kHz glare, and you're not going to get any of that with the Starfield. I'd say that they're probably the most forgiving and non-fatiguing earphones that also retains a certain amount of detail that I've ever used. I know I've heard some people refer to the Blonde BL3 like this, but to my ears, at least with the specific unit of Blonde BL3 that I had, not being able to account for unit variants, the Blonde is just way, way too relaxed and lacking in detail. It might have that relaxed tuning. It just loses all detail as a result. It's way too far. I mean, you look at it like this. If the TRN T4 is at the bar slamming shots, the Moondrop Starfield is kicked back in an easy chair sipping a glass of whiskey. The Blonde BL3 is passed out in bed at home, never made it to the party. It's just that relaxed. in before I get a bunch of downvotes for criticizing the Blonde BR3 again, because some people seem to get really offended when I criticize the Blonde BR3. So relax. I actually really like the Blonde BR3. It's just not the giant killer that people keep making it out to be. Let's move on to the value and conclusion then. And if it wasn't obvious, because I have been quite nitpicky, I am quite nitpicky in my reviews generally, and I do really, really like the Moondrop Starfield quite a lot. But at the same time, I think I probably prefer the TRN T4 on a more personal level. And part of that's going to be the fit, let's be honest. But in the Starfield, you're getting a really, really sexy IEM with an absolutely excellent build and looks. You're getting a really good, nice, decent cable out of the box. I think these are going to suit a lot of people. And also, speaking of pricing, at around about $100, which is the same as the TRN T4, they're priced just about right as well. To my mind, they don't replace the T4, but they certainly complement them. And if you're on the fence, I would say get the T4 for a more lively and detailed earphone. Get the Starfield for a more relaxed and safe tuning with that premium look. It's definitely a more of a luxury choice. All in then, I really, really like the Moondrop Starfield. Is it perfect? Of course not, but nothing ever is. But the Moondrop Starfield definitely gets a big thumbs up from me. Right, that's going to do it for this review, and if you like this video, then don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't already, then please consider subscribing. Thank you so much to the patrons, and if you want to support the channel, then check the links down in the description. You can also support the channel by commenting, liking, and sharing. That all helps me out a lot more than you think. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a good one.